So, do they just give the Jennings to Seattle now, or do we still have to wait till the end of the season? On Wednesday, July 28th, 2001, the Seattle Kraken signed goaltender Philipp Grubauer. It's a deal that will earn him almost $6 million per year for the next 6 seasons. And it's definitely one that not a lot of people saw coming when free agency opened up. I mean, even Ron Francis said that the Kraken were surprised to see him still available and unsigned by Colorado when the day got started. And so they figured why not take a shot, and now here we are. Of course, it was just a week ago that the Kraken had their expansion draft, at the end of which a lot of people recognized that this was a very defensively solid team with pretty decent goaltending, even if it was a bit young. On the forward end, though, there were still a lot of questions to be answered, and some of the players they passed up on were some of the biggest questions among them. And since, unlike Vegas, there weren't any side deals, there really wasn't much of an explanation other than they just wanted to save cap space. So when it came to free agency, it was time to see if the Kraken could put their money where their mouth was, and they certainly did in day one. Alongside Grubauer, who again will be earning $5.9 million for the next 6 seasons, the Kraken also picked up Alex Wennberg from Florida and Jaden Schwartz from St. Louis. But in the interest of not having another half an hour long video, I'm going to get to those ones in separate videos. So we're going to stick with Grubauer, who was the biggest and most surprising signing that the Kraken made of the 3 of those. Now, like I said, we knew that the Kraken were going to be making some moves in free agency, and a week ago, it looked like the biggest name that they would be going after was going to be Gabriel Landeskog, also from Colorado. But the night before free agency was set to open, Colorado finally managed to make ends meet with Landeskog and got him signed. But just because Sakic was able to keep Landeskog from the free agency market, didn't mean that Ron Francis wasn't going to find another big name player to sign from Colorado. Now, I also recognize that, especially with the Kraken, there are likely a number of you who are newer fans that might not be as familiar even with who Grubauer is. So let's go ahead and take a look at the player that the Kraken just picked up. Grubauer is a 29-year-old German-born 6'1", right around 190-pound goaltender who was picked in the 4th round of the 2010 draft by the Washington Capitals. And it was with the Capitals that he got his first taste of NHL action at the age of 21 in the 2012-13 season, though he only played 2 games. The next season, however, he did get a little bit more substantial playing time, playing in 17 games where he managed to play pretty well with a .925 save percentage and a 2.38 goals against. Both very much better than the league averages in both those categories. But he really wouldn't start to see decent, consistent play time until 2 years later, at which point he once again made a pretty good impression with a .918 save percentage and a 2.32 goals against in 22 games, which at that point made him really stick in the NHL, and he would play the next 3 seasons with the Capitals, largely serving as a backup option. And as you can see in the next couple of years in DC, his numbers got even better. But after the Capitals made their run to the Stanley Cup Final in the 2017-18 season and ended up winning it all, he would move on to Colorado, where he would start to serve a similar role to what he did his last year in DC, being kind of a 1B option in a goalie tandem. But even though in his first couple of years in Colorado, his save percentage dropped a few points, though still pretty good, and his goals against average went up a little bit, in this last season, there's no way around the fact that he was one of the absolute best goaltenders in the NHL, eventually being a finalist for the Vezina by the end of the season. It's also definitely worth mentioning that even with his numbers fluctuating year to year, as you saw a little bit there, he has never in the course of his career finished a season, not even those 2 seasons where he only played a couple of games, with a save percentage below league average. In fact, for the majority of his career, he's been well above league average when it comes to save percentage. And really, pretty much the exact same is true for his goals against average, where again, he has been below league average in every season of his career, with the exception of that first one, where again, he only played 2 games. One of the biggest differences, though, between his time in DC and his time in Colorado is the fact that with the Capitals in 3 playoff runs, he only got into 4 games, and to be honest, didn't look particularly good in those. But in the last 3 years that he's been in Colorado, he has been pretty much their starting goaltender for the postseason, and has looked pretty good in the time he's been there, if not excellent, even if it hasn't necessarily led to them making it to a cup finals or obviously winning one. So, as you may have picked up on by now, Seattle is getting a very solid goaltender in Grubauer, who is coming off of one of, if not the best season of his career, and certainly the one that got him the most recognition around the league. I knew free agency was going to be fun with the amount of cap space the Kraken had, but I was not expecting this, and I really, really love this signing. I mean, how could you not? The dude wore aviators during a game. Yeah, aviators. I mean, granted, he had a good reason to. It was a sunny game at Lake Tahoe, but still, how freaking badass looking is that? Plus, if you enjoy crowd reactions that sound like someone's getting booed, you're gonna like this guy. But even with all of that, and as exciting as this signing is, and as important as having good goaltending is for a good team, you're probably wondering what the heck the Kraken are planning here, considering they did sign 2 pretty decent young goaltenders for the expansion draft. Well, for one, again, they weren't necessarily expecting Grubauer to be available, much less that they would get him. So they did have to move one of the other 2, and Vanecek got traded back to DC where he came from for a second-round pick in the 2023 draft. As far as Driedger is concerned, well, he may very well have been the one person in Seattle that wasn't necessarily excited about this news yesterday. He was, at the time of the expansion draft, looking pretty locked in as the starter or at least 1A option in goal for the Kraken, and maybe even the face of the franchise to start things out. Or certainly one of them anyway, but now with Grubauer coming in, that definitely has flipped on its head a little bit, as Driedger would definitely look like probably the 1B option in a tandem. Of course, you might be wondering, if they picked up a goaltender as good as Grubauer, why wouldn't they just have him be the full-time starter instead of as part of a tandem? Well, again, they still have Driedger, who they are paying $3.5 million for the next 3 years, which is not really the money you pay a backup, plus they definitely want to see what Driedger has. Not to mention the fact that at least to this point in his career, Grubauer has only played 40 games at most during the course of a season, which isn't even quite half of a full season in the NHL. Now, granted, that 40-game season did come last year, where the full season was 56 games, so he may be capable of doing a full starting role, but again, I think especially with the amount of back-to-back games that are going to happen in the 2021-22 season because of the Olympic break, it's pretty likely that again they're going to be going a tandem route here with Grubauer as the 1A and Driedger as the 1B. In fact, in his press conference after day 1 of free agency, GM Ron Francis basically said as much, that with as many back-to-back days as they have, as well as the amount of travel that a team in Seattle is going to have to do because of where they are geographically compared to other teams, having 2 goaltenders that can share the load is pretty important to keeping them fresh throughout the course of a full season, much less having them ready for a potential playoff run. And on top of all that, as I mentioned in my review of the expansion draft, Driedger really did just get his first full taste of NHL action this last season, and while again it went very well for him, he certainly wouldn't be the first goaltender to have a good debut season and then not necessarily live up to that the season following. So having another very solid starter caliber goaltender is definitely something that will help him ease into a season where he plays quite a bit more than the 23 games he did this last year. Plus, by the sounds of it, even with the Driedger-Vanecek combo that they had during the expansion draft, they were still going to be doing some kind of tandem, just with Driedger as the 1A instead of the 1B that he looks to be now. So ultimately, assuming they go some sort of 30-50 split, which I would kind of expect, that really means that he will be playing a little bit less, but not a whole ton less than he would have otherwise. Now, actually, while we're on the subject of the expansion draft, you might remember that there was one player in particular that a lot of people were talking about that had been exposed to Seattle. Some guy named Carey Price, a goaltender from Montreal, if I remember right. Now, of course, as we know now, the Kraken decided not to take Price, largely because of his cap hit at $10.5 million through the next 5 seasons. which at the time had, let's just say, a mixed reaction, with a lot of people thinking that Seattle missed out big time on a name like Carey Price. Now, obviously, hindsight is 2020, and even the Kraken said that they were surprised Grubauer was even available, much less that they got him in free agency. So it's not like we could have seen that coming at the time of the expansion draft, but it's also true that now the Kraken have a combination of Driedger and Grubauer in goal for noticeably cheaper than they would have been paying just Carey Price if they had picked him up. So again, this is exactly why the Kraken didn't take players like Price, so that they could have the cap space to pick up guys like Grubauer. Of course, that whole hindsight thing does go both ways here a little bit, because with Vanecek, who they picked up from DC, they did select him in the expansion draft over Dillon, who DC flipped a couple of days later to Winnipeg for 2 second-round picks. While Vanecek, they ended up just sending right back to DC for one of those second-round picks, ultimately potentially losing out on 1 second-round pick. That second-round pick was said a lot there, but you get the point. The Kraken missed out on a little bit of value there by picking up Vanecek and trading him back, rather than picking up Dillon and, of course, eventually getting Grubauer. But again, that's kind of just how this goes. As for what the signing of Grubauer means for the ever-evolving picture of the outlook of the Kraken's first season, well, let's just say we already knew that this was going to be a pretty defensively strong team with decent goaltending that was going to be hard to score on, even with the addition of the fact that the forward group, while they have scoring issues of their own, is a pretty defensively solid group. Now the addition of Grubauer only adds to how hard this team is going to be to score on, potentially one of the hardest teams to score on in the entire NHL. Of course, again, that forward group might have issues scoring on the other end of things, but still, this is a team that looks like they'll be playing quite a few low-scoring, tight games, and probably quite a number of overtime games, which makes for a pretty exciting, intense first season for Kraken fans. Not that that's something we're not used to with the Seahawks, but still, it should be a fun one. And again, I get the naysaying from people that probably really just don't want to see another expansion team do really well out of the gate, as well as looking at this forward group with a fair number of pretty big question marks as to how this team is going to score points. But still, if this team does make the playoffs, let's just say that defensive first teams with good goaltending tend to do pretty well in the postseason, so anything could happen if they can get there. Of course, I'd love to hear what you guys think in the comments section. Do you think that this was a good signing by Grubauer, and do you like the deal that he got signed for? I mean, 6 years is a pretty long time, and he is 29 years old and will be 35 by the end of it. But still, personally, I think it was worth it. And I'd also love to hear what you think as far as where this leaves the Kraken and expectations entering the first season. Otherwise, we have reached the end of this one, so if you have made it to this point, thank you very much for watching. If you did like or enjoy this video, there will be buttons for that kind of stuff down below. I hope you do join me, as we will be talking about the Jaden Schwartz and Alex Wennberg signings coming up here shortly. But until next time, be good to each other and go Kraken. Peace.